This is a tutorial of the demonstration problem in Chapter 16, which is all about process costing in the managerial accounting class at Principia College. So let's get into this. The question says, it has 5 parts, and I've split this Excel document into 5 parts. So first we're going to prepare a physical flow reconciliation for July as illustrated in Exhibit 16.12. So you can follow along in your book, actually, with the demonstration problem. It has all the answers there, but I'm going to be describing to you how this all works. So if that's helpful, that's what this video is for. So you're in the right place. Okay, so let's get started. So to create a physical flow reconciliation table, you need to have your units to account for and your units accounted for table. These are 2 different columns. So the first part of the units accounted the units accounted for table is the beginning goods in process inventory. So that we can find right here, 5,000. So we're going to enter that, 5,000. Next comes units started this period. We look in this is the information they've given us. We look down here, units started this period. Oh, look, there it is, 20,000. So we write that right here. Okay. And then the total units to account for equals the sum of these. You can do that in your head, but I'm just going to do it in Excel for fun. And it comes out to 25,000. Okay. So now let's do the units accounted for table. So we have to find the units completed and transferred. And so that we can find right here. Units completed this period. So just enter 17,000. Then we need ending goods in process inventory. Ending goods in process inventory is right here, the line below it, 8,000 units. We enter 8,000 units. And the total units accounted for is just the sum of those 2 right there, and it comes up to 25,000. And you need to reconcile the 2 basically, but it's been reconciled because both your total units to account for and your total units accounted for are the same. So that's a good thing. Okay. This is part 2 of the demonstration problem found on page 709 of chapter 16 in the managerial accounting textbook. So step 2 says compute the equivalent units of production in July for direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. So we need to compute equivalent units of production because they are going to come in handy later in later steps 3 and 4 for creating the report of costs accounted for. So let's go about doing that right now. So first we need to create a table of equivalent units of production. So the first step is to write down the equivalent units completed and transferred out during the period. And that you find right here, units completed this period, 17,000. So you're going to write 17,000 for all 3, direct labor, direct materials, and direct overhead. Okay? Now you need to calculate the equivalent units in ending goods in process. And to do that, you need to look down here. So ending goods in process, look at that, 8,000 units. And it gives us these percentages completed. So materials, the workers completed 100% of the materials. So that's a good thing. So what we're going to do here is do equals 8,000 times 1, basically, or 100%, because all 8,000 units were completed in direct materials at least. Okay, now we're going to go to direct labor. And so direct labor, tells us right here, labor and overhead are at only 20% completed. So what you're going to do is equals 8,000. And you're going to multiply by 20%. And so multiplying 8,000 units by 20% will give you the number of units completed. So they've completed 16,000 units this period. And then we need to create a factory overhead column. And so what we're going to do there is we're going to look down here again. Oh, 20% for overhead at 8,000 units. So we do 8,000 units. Multiply by 20%, and you've got your 1,600 for factory overhead. So now what you do to compute your equivalent units of production, you just sum all these, and you can just drag like that. And look at that. There's your equivalent units of production for direct materials, direct labor, and direct overhead. This is part 3 of the demonstration problem. And we are going to compute the cost per equivalent units of production in July for direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Okay, so let me just fix my typo right here, and let's get started. So the first part of this step is to bring in the costs of beginning goods in process. And so to do this, we need to look down here so we're going to do it both for all three: direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead, so all three. And if you look in the question here, it has beginning goods in process, direct materials used 20,000. So you're going to enter 20,000 there. Then under direct labor, you have 9,600 used, so you enter that into here. And factory overhead, you have 19,200, so you're going to enter that here. 200. Okay. So costs incurred this period is the next step in creating the cost per equivalent units of production table. And to do this, we need to take 190,000, which is the costs incurred this period, and we need to add that to the direct materials. And so you can find that number right here under direct materials used right here, 190,000. Then to direct labor, we're going to add 55,500. So 55,500 direct labor incurred. You can find that number right here. Then for factory overhead, we have it right here. You find the number that you're going to add in. Costs incurred, overhead applied. So 111,000 is the number that you want to enter here. So those are all the costs that we've incurred this period. And so again, you find the direct materials used here, you find the direct labor incurred here, and you find the factory overhead applied here. Okay. Now, total cost just literally equals the sum of this column plus that column. And I'm just going to drag this across. And there's the total costs for direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. So now, to find the cost per equivalent units of production, which is why we're making this table, all we do is we enter our EUPs in here from the last problem. So that's 25,000 for direct materials, 18,600 for for direct labor, and 18,600 for factory overhead. And then to calculate cost per EUP, you just take your total costs, and you divide by EUP, and then you can just drag across, and there is your cost per EUP. Awesome. 4 of the demonstration problem in chapter 16. The question says prepare a report of costs accounted for and a report of costs to account for. So to do this, we put our title on the table, and then first we're going to go into costs of units transferred out to find the total costs accounted for. So first we're going to do direct materials, and so to calculate direct materials, you take the EUPs that we calculated in the last problem. So I could click right here on the cost per EUP for direct materials. Or I could just write in 8.4 times the 17,000, which was the EUP that we have right here, the units completed this period for direct materials. Okay, awesome. Enter, and then that's what you get for that. Then we're going to do direct labor, which equals, if we remember from the last one, 350. So we're going to 350 times 17,000. And then, bam, that's what you get for direct labor. And then we're going to do 7 equals 7, because that's what we calculated in our cost per EUP in the last part. And 7 times 17,000, which is the units completed this period. And so then you do those multiplied together, and you get 119,000. Okay, so cost of units completed this period is the next, is basically the next column, and that's literally just the sum of these three together. There you go. And now we have to calculate the cost of ending goods in process. So to do that, we're going to take our EUPs, which we calculated before. You find that they come in really handy when you're doing step number 4. Because we're going to do 8.4, which is what we calculated as the EUP for direct materials, and multiply it times 8,000, which is the number of units in our ending goods in process. There's that for direct materials, and we're going to do the same thing for direct labor and factory overhead. So it's the exact same thing as the last step, except this time we're using 8,000 instead of 17,000. And then cool. Oh, sorry. My bad. So here, you're actually going to use 16,000 because that was for materials. Because remember, materials was completed at 100%, so that's why you used 8,000 in the direct materials calculations. But when you're doing direct labor calculations, you need to take into account that it was only used for 20%. So instead, you actually end up using, if I can go back here, the 16,000 that we calculated here for direct labor and factory overhead. So now I'm going to go back here, and so these are the numbers that you should get. So 67,200, 5,600, and 11,200. Okay. So the cost of ending goods and process inventory is just the sum of those. Okay. And then the total cost accounted for is this plus this. And you should get 405,300. Okay.